Hi, everybody. Welcome to this live chat with me, Laura, and my guest, Lauren Martin. Today, we're talking about how to grow your podcast with SEO. But this is so relevant to so many media creators, whether you're a podcaster, a blogger, or a vlogger. So I'm super excited today to unpack what SEO and keywords are, how they apply to our context, as well as tackle some misconceptions that we have or commonly encounter when it comes to the topic of SEO. So grab a cup of tea and let us know where you're listening from. We'd love to hear from you. We're going to be answering your questions as we chat today. I also want to know if you're a podcaster, please let us know what the name of your show is and drop that in the comments, because this is a great opportunity to share what you create with fellow people joining today's live. Thanks so much for joining today, Lauren. It's so great to have this chat. I'm really looking forward to getting into it.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's great to be here. So in case we haven't met yet, I am Lauren and I'm an education copywriter. I mainly work within the language education space and I have been basically since I started my career. And that's involved kind of copywriting with a large emphasis on SEO. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to share some useful insights with you today.
Absolutely. And I will say, for folk listening today, Lauren and I actually worked together last year. And the reason why I have like my blog space on my website and my newsletter is all thanks to the work I did with Lauren. She helped me overcome my writing hiatus, which I think I hadn't really written with confidence for so many years. But by working with you, Lauren, I was able to really kind of focus on things, make sure I was discoverable by my new audience and get my business basically out there. So I'm a big fan, and I'm really excited to be sharing your expertise with our audience today. Right. Shall we get into it with the first question being like, shall we tackle the first one of being like, what is SEO and keywords? Because I think there is a lot of jargon that surrounds this topic and it can feel a bit intimidating with all this jargon. Could you summarize what SEO and keywords are?
Yeah, absolutely. So SEO stands for search engine optimization, which sounds a lot more technical and confusing than it actually is. This was actually one of the first things I learned when I kind of stepped into the world of marketing, which is just kind of proof that you can learn it yourself. So yeah, it stands for search engine optimization, and that is essentially the process of optimizing your content so that it shows up on search engines. Typically, we've spoken about SEO in terms of Google, so like writing website content and blog content. But nowadays, we're seeing more social media platforms move to like an SEO model, a search engine model. So podcast platforms are now search engines, and so are YouTube. And I think even some of the social media platforms like TikTok are moving in that direction as well. So yeah, it's essentially the process of optimizing your content so that it shows up when people search for relevant topics related to the content that you've posted.
Brilliant. That's magic summary. So in terms of like podcasters, I guess like the SEO, the keywords and everything would apply to things like the podcast title, the subtitle, the show notes, like the description below the episodes. Am I right in kind of thinking that's where it fits in?
Yes, yeah, exactly. So there are a few different things that you can do with podcast SEO, because you're not only targeting the podcasting platform itself, which, as I've just said, is kind of a mini search engine, but you can also use that content in other places. And I think that's the beauty of it. So as well as optimizing, which we'll go into in a second, optimizing the title, the description and show notes and everything on your podcast, you can also use that to optimize blog posts and things so that your podcast shows up in more places.
And that's what we want, isn't it? We want to get our content out there so people can discover it. Because I know there's podcasters here I can see, and hello Shane, hello Richard, who are joining us, who have excellent content, and we want their audience to be able to discover them, right? So they can grow their community and reach more people, have a bigger impact. That's what it's all about.
Absolutely. That's kind of the magic of it, is that just by optimizing your content, you can show up and like attract more people to it.
You know, before we get into today's misconceptions, there was a little thing I did with one of my blogs recently. It's like a little experiment based on what you told me about SEO. And I basically went through and thought about what the keywords in this blog that I could optimize and make sure I'm using them a bit more frequently in both the description and the actual content itself. I made a few tweaks, and that had a huge impact on a blog that I thought I thought it just wasn't like people just weren't enjoying it, and that's why it wasn't performing. But that wasn't the case. It was the fact that I hadn't optimized it so people weren't discovering it. So that literally just took, I saw the difference within a few, I would say, weeks to months. And I saw that blog go from being, middling performance on my website to something that's actually attracting a lot of traffic now.
That's fantastic. That's really great that you're able to do that. And I think that is the beauty of it. If you have your podcast content on your website as well, you can go back and edit it. And I think that your point there about now you're seeing how it is actually performing is really relevant, because a lot of the time we'll post some content that perhaps we think is good and then it's not performing as well as we thought it would. It's easy to just assume that topic isn't interesting. But actually, it could be exactly what you've just said there, and it's just not getting enough traffic for you to tell whether or not it's interesting to your audience. And SEO helps bring that traffic in without you having to do much day-to-day work.
It sounds wonderful. So shall we tackle the first misconception? Which one do you want to go with first? Because like we said at the beginning, there is a lot of stuff out there about SEO. It can feel a bit intimidating for people. There's also marketing gurus that I've had that have kind of negged me about SEO and how I need to spend a lot of money on it in order to optimize my website. Gosh, there's a lot to unpack. Where shall we start first?
So I think the biggest misconception that I have heard is there's a few actually related to keywords. So I think it would be great if we start there. And the one that I come across surprisingly often is that keywords are like this magical thing that live in a secret place that only the copywriter, the content creator, or the tech person can access.
But that's not the case. I can access spaces where I can obviously do the description there's an SEO description on my website, for example, but it's not just there that you're talking about, right? Is it in the content itself that the keywords live?
Yeah, so keywords are essentially phrases. I think keywords is quite a misleading term, because you wouldn't just type in podcast, say, into Google or onto Spotify to find what you're looking for. You would type something a bit longer in. So like thinking of it like a key phrase would be more accurate. So these key phrases are essentially the search terms, the things that you want to show up for, and you can include them naturally throughout your content. So there are certain places that they should be, like in the title, or like tagging the podcast, for example, but they should also be used naturally throughout the content. And that is something that is super easy to do. And you might even be doing it naturally because you're talking about that topic. So I think it's something that has perhaps come from the past when like web developers were the only ones who could access or put the content up. But nowadays it's so much more accessible, which also means that SEO is accessible.
So for an example, let's try and think of an example what that would look like then, these keywords, phrases really. How can I make sure that I'm kind of remaining competitive, considering like maybe there's some phrases and keywords that much larger content creators are using, and so I may be kind of trying to compete with them when they have a much bigger budget and they're probably spending on advertisements as well, so their content is obviously coming up first. But I'm talking about the same sort of topics. Like we both talk about language educators, English language educators specifically. So ELT is a very common keyword or phrase I use. Do you have any tips on like what sort of phrases and keywords I should be using in my content to kind of not get just bowled over by the big creators?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that as a small creator, I think we all have quite an advantage. So the big, let's say ELT companies, if they're running a podcast, they'll be targeting what we call high volume search terms. So these are things that tons of people are searching for every day. So it might be, for example, like the top 10 English learning resources. The chances of a small creator being able to compete with platforms like that are very, very slim, even if your content is much more valuable than theirs, simply because they've got the strength behind their platform, their website, their podcast, etc., to push that content to the top. Whereas for small creators, we need to look for search terms that are less searched for, basically, which sounds counterintuitive, but it means that you will attract probably more people than you would if you were to try and compete with some of these bigger creators, because you stand more chance of showing up, but also you'll attract a more targeted audience, because it usually means that the key phrase has to be longer than, say, like top 10 English resources. You might need to add a few more words in there.
I see. So I'm trying to think of examples for folk that I can see are on this live. So it could be something like storytelling for speakers of Spanish, learning English, something like that. Obviously worded a lot better than I've just tried to attempt. Or I know Shane did a recent episode on like de-implementation in schools and like de-implementation in education leadership. Are those kind of like examples that people could use?
Yeah, I would think about what you do specifically and the kind of questions that you get asked by your audience, because it doesn't matter too much if that search term doesn't have much volume if your people are asking you that stuff, because it means that there will be people out there looking for that. But if you're creating content just because you kind of think that that's what people want rather than what people want, then that would be a little bit harder to show up. But just to give you an example, so on my blog, I have an article about writing a sales page for a language course. Now, I could have tried to compete with some bigger marketing companies with a title like the ultimate guide to writing a sales page, but there would be virtually no chance that I would show up. So I've just added in, I think it says something like the ultimate guide to writing a language course sales page, which makes it more targeted and means that even if some of those bigger companies are showing up for that search term, because my content is more relevant to the language course part, it has more chance of outranking them.
That's brilliant. And that's so encouraging as well. Like this idea that we can attract obviously people to our blog space, to our podcast, whatever it is that we're creating. Of course, this kind of applies to our show notes as a podcaster, or if we have a website as well, that's that space there too. That as a small creator, we can stand out and we don't have to try and compete with the larger budgets that these larger competitors or other creators may have. We can actually really stand out and really just appeal to our niche. That's fantastic. Very encouraging.
Yeah, exactly. It is. Oh, I'm glad it's encouraging. It is, I guess it's one of the most affordable ways to market your business. It just takes thinking a bit more strategically when you can't compete with these obvious search terms.
So I think we've tackled the first one really, really well. This whole idea that keywords live in a special place, they most certainly don't, and that keywords are obviously phrases, and by being specific and intentional about who we're talking to and working on these phrases, we can stand out. I know you have lots more misconceptions that you want to unpack on this live. So where shall we go next?
So I think the next thing, or we've kind of touched on it already, is, but just to recap, is the fact that keywords aren't just words, they're phrases.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you start thinking about the kind of questions that people are asking you, then you can use that to guide your content ideas. And I think this is another thing that's really great about SEO, is you're not just pulling you're not pulling content ideas from thin air. You're actually able to use the keywords to guide your content and then make it more strategic from an SEO perspective, but also for your audience, because you're going to be answering their questions. So when it comes to actually finding these keywords, because I think that's probably the next step that people will be wondering, where are they? How can I find them? I would start by thinking about the kind of content, like I've just said, that people like, the kind of questions people ask you. Make some notes of that, and then you can go to Google or use some specific keyword search tools, which there are also free versions, if you're looking to keep costs down. And then you can start typing these terms in and seeing what's showing up for these search terms, and use that to choose the keywords and then go away and create your content.
You mean like when we type into Google, there's often like frequently asked questions, or people are also searching for? Is that kind of like the space you're looking at for inspiration?
So that, yeah, there's definitely inspiration there. I think that's a fantastic feature that Google has, because it will show you exactly what people are often searching for, to the point that it's like given it its own space on the the search results.
Yeah.
But also looking at the other content that's already out there, because sometimes we'll have a great idea and then we'll go to Google or a podcasting platform and see that lots of people have already spoken on this topic. So the trick there is to actually listen to the podcasts or read the articles and figure out, is there anything new that you can add? Because if there's not, then you're not really going to stand much chance of ranking high, because the search platforms are always looking to deliver the best and most relevant content to their users. And if you're just kind of adding to the same stuff, then it's going to be quite hard to show up.
You mentioned there that aside from Google, there were some other tools and some free tools as well that people could use in order to find inspiration for topics. Do you have a particular tool that is a favorite that you suggest?
So Wordstream is a good free tool, but you can also look at Google Trends. You're making notes.
Yeah, I am actually.
Google Trends is good because that shows you what people are searching for. Google Ads keyword searcher as well. I'll share some links with you, or I'll recap those at the end so that you can also have a look for them.
Thanks so much. And for folk that are watching us live today, please post your questions and comments. We are watching as we're chatting today. So if you have a particular question about any of these points we're talking about or anything else, just drop it in the chat and we will answer them as we go along. Fantastic. We're making good pace actually with this. You've talked about where keywords live and the fact that we can use these resources to get inspiration for our keywords. I should say key phrases. I feel that's kind of more accurate in describing.
Yeah.
Where should we go next? What's another misconception that you commonly hear about SEO?
So I touched on kind of where you should put keywords there. So we can go into a little bit more detail on that, but also that will address the misconception that once you've put your keywords in these places, that's it, job done.
Right, yeah, no.
Unfortunately not. I mean, it was starting to sound too good to be true. So
it was, wasn't it? Yeah, that's true. Need a reality check.
Yeah. So we'll go back to where you put these keywords. So you found them, you know that people are searching for them. Then the first step after that is to plan your content with these keywords in mind. I keep saying keywords. The idea is that you have one main key phrase for the piece of content that you're creating, and then you can naturally weave in some related terms. So natural is the key here, because you don't want to be putting keywords here, there, and everywhere just so that you're going to rank. That was a thing in the past. It's actually called keyword stuffing, and in the past that helped content rank higher, but now that the search engine algorithms are so much more intelligent that they can tell if that's what somebody is doing. So include them naturally throughout the content. That means if you're writing a podcast script, you can just make sure that when you're reading through it, the keywords are in there, balanced, and they're not kind of jarring to the listener.
You know, when you were saying like shoehorning the words in, I was thinking about there was that trend that you told me about when people would add keywords and phrases into their content, whether it's like a blog space or like a vlog description or even like a podcast show notes, and then they just color them in the color of the background. So they were there embedded, but people couldn't see them, but they'd like just repeat the phrases again and again and again in an effort to kind of bring their content up at the top of the Google search engine. But it sounds like the search engines have gotten really smart to this, and this does not work as a hack anymore.
No, it definitely doesn't work. So don't try that. It will actually penalize creators who do that now. But I think
really,
yes, yeah, it's that smart. It's actually also smart enough to listen to an audio file, which is why I said there to make sure that your keywords are naturally throughout your podcast script, because it's not only written content. Google algorithms, podcasting algorithms can actually tell like how relevant the actual audio file is to the topic.
Good stuff. You know, when I was writing things for my newsletter and stuff, one of the key things that you told me is when I'm planning content. So obviously think about the keywords first, take that inspiration from what's trending in search in the search engines or those tools you mentioned. And then like think of that phrase, have it there as you're writing, like literally put it somewhere at the top as you're planning your content as a really clear reminder, and keep on coming back to that. That kind of having that in a place that's visible. Whereas before, I think what I was doing before you gave me that tip is I had the keywords, but I wasn't really thinking about them that much. And then I had to go back and like try and shoehorn it in. And I think that point of you saying like using it naturally, using it authentically is something I've been better able to do now that I think, oh, I see this question about, for example, how to edit using GarageBand for beginners. This is trending. Okay, how can I bring this into my content and my vlog in the case of the YouTube channel? And that was really helpful, like just having it there, having it somewhere visible, and then, yeah, planning the content around that rather than, oh, I've planned the content, now let's get the keywords in.
Yeah, exactly. That's when it starts to feel unnatural, because you will look at places, and it's quite frustrating.
Yes.
From a writing point of view, if you've got an article that you're happy with, and then you're trying, like, can I put it here? Can I put it here? And it just, yeah, it ruins it.
It's like playing a really bad game of bingo, I feel. We have some questions from folk that are watching the live now. Thank you so much for posting your questions. So we can tackle a few as we go along, because this is relevant to what you're just talking about.
Absolutely.
Let's see. Oh, this is a good question about content that's in our archives. And thanks so much for asking about this. We talked about this during our planning for this session. Is some podcasters or creators who are joining us live today perhaps are thinking, oh no, I've not done any SEO or keyword optimization for any of my content. What do I do with the backlog? Do you have any kind of suggestions on how to kind of optimize that?
Yeah, absolutely. So first things first, don't worry. This isn't a suggestion that you suddenly go back and re-record every podcast episode you've ever created. Absolutely not. But there are things that you can do to optimize the existing content you've got. So like I mentioned, you've probably already been using some keywords naturally throughout the content because you're talking about that topic. But what you can do is, excuse me, go away and have a look on Google and see, use some of the tools that I mentioned to see what search terms are coming up for the topic that you've recorded the podcast on. Then you'll be able to probably find a couple of keywords that are related to it. And then you can go and edit the things that are easy to edit. So the title, the show notes, tags if you haven't tagged the podcast episode, if the platform you're using allows for that. And then also if you have the transcript on your website, not necessarily saying you should edit the transcript, but you could then go and edit any descriptions that you have around the transcript, or again, the title, and then what's called the meta description, which is the little bit of text that shows up on Google.
That's a really good point about like the descriptions or any supporting text that goes on the website. So for my podcast, I've started doing this now. I now have like a little introduction about who's speaking, and then I have a summary of key points that is very malleable. I could change that. So for going back through archives, that would be a really key space that I could change. And then I have the transcript below. Like you say, maybe I'd make a few changes, but that's mainly for accessibility purposes that exists there. But that malleable kind of key points space that lives on my website and also is the same in my show notes. That's the space, it sounds like, where podcasters could perhaps make the easiest changes to align that topic with what's trending, just to kind of make sure more people discover it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned there at the start, when you made a couple of tweaks to your blog post and you saw a big impact in the performance, chances are happen with your podcast episodes as well, without you editing, like I said, without you editing the podcast itself.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to go back to do editing. I did that with a few of my first early seasons, like to start like remastering the tracks. It's a huge investment of time, and that's worthwhile doing. But I think for what we're talking about today, this would, like, on my own experience of doing that blog that I mentioned, it took me about 15 minutes just to sit down, have a look and make a few tweaks. And I wasn't looking to kind of overhaul the whole thing. And the same would be for my podcast notes as well. Just have a look, take about 15 minutes, make a few quick changes. Because when we're talking about show notes in particular, they're like 4,000 characters. That's not a lot of words. So it is a very kind of short mini blog space that we're working with. That's brilliant. Thank you so much for asking that question. That was really helpful. And I see there's a few others as well, which I'm just going to try and quickly catch up with. You're probably faster at reading these than I am without my glasses on, Lauren.
Oh, you say that. I see one here for blogs on a website. I know that Google normally and automatically adds keywords from heading setting formats. Is it still preferred to use tags and keywords from the dashboard? I'm not too sure what you mean by the dashboard, but I host my blog on WordPress, and I usually just find the keywords from external tools like the ones I mentioned, and then I naturally weave it throughout the content, add it into the title, the meta description, which, like I said, is the small bit of text that shows up on Google, and then you can tag them. I don't usually tag them, and I don't think that has a big impact on SEO.
Brilliant. And I can see we have another question just to clarify about the search engines also reading like the content of the episodes themselves. What we're talking about here in terms of SEO and podcasting is it applies to your title, so that the text of the title you're using, any subtitles, which some podcasters choose to use, the show notes that live below the episode, so that text description. And maybe if you do have a website, some podcasters do, some podcasters don't, but if you do have a website, anything else that lives on that website with that episode. So you may embed the episode on your website page. Again, you may have the title, a summary there, like I do a bit of a longer summary of key points, and the transcript. That's what the search engines are reading. And that's the key thing to kind of leverage if you're wanting to make your content discoverable. So I hope I've clarified that. They're not listening yet, I don't think. Well, unless you can.
Well, actually, so in my research, I found that some are now able to do that. I don't know how much detail it goes into, but I fully expect that that's gonna just improve. So yeah, if you really want to take SEO seriously, then I would start thinking about just making sure that those keywords are mentioned again naturally throughout the podcast episode itself.
Okay, so forget what I said and listen to Lauren, because she knows the latest. That's crazy that I missed that they're actually able to tune in to the audio tracks.
Yeah, I think it sounds like
extent.
It's still a relatively new thing, and I think it's probably just scanning it. So I guess if it was listening to our conversation now, but we marketed this as like, I don't know, how to write a website, it's probably going to be able to tell that the topic isn't exactly the same.
Yeah, that's one thing to watch, isn't it? For sure. Thanks very much, everybody, for asking these questions. And feel free to keep on adding comments and questions as we talk along. We've got a few more misconceptions to tackle. So where should we go next? Because I know we've got a few more in the bag that we want to talk about.
Yes, so I think that kind of leads in quite nicely to the next one, which is keywords are all you need to optimize. So this very much depends on which platform you're using. So if you're putting your transcripts onto your blog, then that's definitely it's not only keywords that you need to think about. There are a few things. You can split SEO into two categories. You've got the kind of on-page SEO, or I guess, yeah, for podcasts, that would be the same. The title, the show notes, the things that we've spoken about. But you've also got the technical side. Now, I know like surface level stuff of the technical side, and the kind of stuff that the only stuff you really need to know unless you want to take it really seriously. And that is that your domain, your website, your podcast will have it will be ranked on this scale of 0 to 100. And this is what's called domain authority. It's essentially assigned to the search engines of how strong how authoritative your website is. So the only websites that kind of meet the 99, 100 mark are websites like Google. You have New York Times, things like that, very high volume of traffic websites. Small creators like us start from, I think, 1, and then we can slowly work our way up. I think I'm up to about 7, so it can be a slow process. But this score can heavily impact how high you show up in the search rankings. which goes back to the point of not trying to compete with the big players in your niche. Because if you're trying to outrank the British Council, chances are it's not going to happen. But if you're going for less competitive search terms, then even with a lower domain authority score, then you're going to be able to get some visibility. So you're probably wondering now, how do I increase that number? So there are a few different things that you can do. So obviously, keywords relevant, you've done the content, but what do you do after that? Next, you have to make sure that you're getting traffic to your podcast, to the transcripts, the show notes, because that is going to signal to the search engine algorithms that this content is relevant and people are finding it useful. Then you also want people to stay on that content, because if they're arriving on it and suddenly thinking this isn't relevant at all, or it's not engaging me, and they leave, then that shows that although people came there, they're leaving straight away. So perhaps it's not as engaging as the traffic would indicate. So those are two important things, which is what comes back to making sure that your content is natural and relevant to your audience. And then you also want to make sure that you're getting people to, well, this is kind of a step on once you've got your content there and you're starting to get some visibility. It's good to start building what are known as backlinks. So these are basically links from other domains to your podcast episodes or your podcast as a whole. So to give you an example, I could link, in fact, I think I did, from a blog post I posted last week that was promoting this event, I linked to Communicating for Impact. So that would be, Laura's got a backlink from me.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And these are kind of like mini votes from other websites to say, this person's credible, this is a valuable piece of content. So that is kind of like networking, but without speaking to people. And it's a signal to the algorithm that you're a trustworthy source of information.
This transfers really well, I think, for podcasters who have the interview format and they have guests on their podcasts, because that's where they can backlink to them, and that could be a selling point for their guests. I'm thinking, because sometimes we're asking guests to volunteer their time and expertise to come on our podcast. So I see also this advantage of, I can include links to your latest book, for example, to your website on my podcast as a way to help people discover you, and also that networking backlinking that you mentioned. Also, I'm thinking for, if we don't have an interview format, and also just how we can encourage people to stay in our own space, in the show notes, and also if we have a website that goes to the podcast, I guess it would be also suggesting other content that might be of interest within our world for our listeners or our audience. Is that how it could work? So if I have a relevant episode that's very connected to, like the recent one I did with Rachel Roberts, I may suggest, you should also listen to this episode with Ola Kowalska, because it's also similar. Probably you're going to like this too, in terms of like the topics they're talking about. Have I got the kind of right idea with those two ideas of how backlinking could live in a podcasting context?
Yeah, absolutely. So backlinking tends to refer to people from other domains who are linking to you. So that would be if I had a podcast, I've linked to your podcast, for example. So that, like you said, lends itself really well to the interview formats, because that can be a real plus for the person coming on. And then you've also got what you've mentioned there is internal linking. So this is really important for the same reasons, because not only do you want to make sure that your content is engaging and it's keeping people on the page, but your goal should be really to keep them in your world for as long as possible. So like you said, if you've linked to a relevant podcast, then that's doing exactly that. You're then moving them on to another piece of content, and encouraging them to stay on your podcast.
I do that on my website. At the bottom of the page, I say, you might also like, and then I have like 3 suggestions for people that are on the website. And I really need to think about how I start doing that in the show notes as well, how I can make space for that. Like if you enjoyed this episode, you might also enjoy this. For those that are just listening on the podcast platform itself, of course, if they're on YouTube, you can obviously select the video that you want to suggest next, or use cards to suggest other episodes at prominent points in the conversation. But this is a really good point of like the internal linking and how we can do it. Also, I think added to this for podcasters as a strategy to grow, networking and going on other people's podcasts or writing a feature blog on somebody's website and backlinking to their podcast is also going to be helpful, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And another thing, benefit of having a podcast is that there are loads of websites out there posting blog articles of like the top 10 podcasts in, say, the ELT world. You could reach out to those people if you're not listed on there already and say, this episode, my podcast might be of interest to your users. And that's another way to get backlinks straight to your podcasting platform.
It's brilliant. It's just a bit awkward, isn't it, to kind of ask those people, I find, like that awkward like conversation, like, hey, I'm not on the list. Can you put me on your list? Like, top 10. Can I be number 11, please? How about the top 20?
Okay, well, maybe, yeah. No, we're not asking them to add another one, but it's just, yeah, kind of getting yourself out there and just saying it in a really friendly way, because I think the goal whenever you're trying to get backlinks is to think about the value you bring to that person's audience. So it's about, yeah, approaching it in a very friendly way. Have you heard of this? We posted an episode on this lately, which your listeners might find useful, for example. Have a couple of templates, actually. I might add it to my blog, so people can steal some templates to reach out to people.
That would be brilliant, because I think it can be a bit tricky to kind of open up that conversation. Can be awkward on know how to start and how to open that channel, really. So I think that would be awesome if you could share those. Super. And thanks for everybody watching along. Please post your questions as we're talking. We've got a few more misconceptions to address, and we'll happily answer your questions about SEO and podcasting towards the end as well. So what haven't we talked about yet? We've got a few more left, haven't we?
Yes, I've done these in a funny order, so just a second. You'll get results overnight. So this is a really important one, because SEO is a long-term strategy. I think it's very easy when we set up a new marketing channel to think we're going to get results very quickly, because social media channels can allow for that to happen. But SEO it's a long game. So I'm not saying you'll see results years from now, but you may have to wait a few months to start seeing your content work its way up the rankings. I had a client who I was writing blogs for, and I think we were doing 3 months of consistent blogging before the posts started to kind of hit the first page of Google and then slowly work their way up. But now those posts sit there and they continue to attract people into her world, which is exactly the same for podcasts. So as long as you have optimize the content, and you're sending traffic to it in the meantime from your other channels, perhaps you have an email list or social media channels, then that's going to help boost the rankings and make sure that it works its way up. But it could take 3 to 6 months.
Is there kind of a sweet spot in terms of the frequency of posting? Because I imagine within those 3 months, you're probably posting every week, maybe, or something. Is there any recommendation for that frequency of content created within that timeline?
I would base that on you and your ability to create content, because posting better quality content less often is better than trying to stay consistent, sticking to a once a week or something. So that example I gave just there of a client was twice a month. So that's absolutely okay. And that's the thing with things like podcasts and blogs. They're your kind of hero content, so they're bigger pieces of content, which means that they have a longer lifespan and a lot more in them. So it doesn't matter if you're not posting every day like you might do on Instagram, for example.
Yeah, that's right. And even with podcasts, my podcast, I just clip it up. I use different aspects of it where it's a transcript, and then I convert that into a summary using ChatGPT. I'm giving away all my secrets now, how I do it. Or I do the clips, short audiograms, as we can call them, which isn't a secret. And that just redistributes on the platforms where my audience is hanging out. But I think your point about not only just it being a hero content and focusing on really putting quality in it, but also finding what's sustainable so you can remain consistent and also enjoy it. You don't have to compete with the big media creators to have a presence and grow a truly engaged audience. And you also shouldn't burn yourself out trying to compete with them either. Like finding what's achievable and realistic for you and conveying that to your audience is so important, and they will show up, you know, they really will, if you can stick to, like, maybe it's like twice a month, like the client that you mentioned.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's also important for making sure that you don't kind of burn out or decide that, oh, it's just not working, I'm just going to give up.
Yeah, and I see so many creators do that as well. They've got really great content, amazing ideas, and they just burn out. And it's like, oh, it's really a shame, because something was growing. It just needed to go for a little bit longer and to be set at a more realistic pace. Super. I think we have time to do one more. Can I pick the one that we talk about next? Would that be all right?
Absolutely.
So I think folk will be able to relate to this, but you may get some like messages sliding into your DMs, as we say, with like marketing gurus saying like, you buy my course, I'll solve all these problems, or you spend all this money and I'll optimize your SEO. I also get emails as well. I don't know how they have my email address, but I also get these cold sales messages from marketing gurus promising me amazing results if I spend heaps of money on it. So I think that's the misconception. Do we have to spend as much money to get the results and to help our content be discoverable?
Absolutely not. No, that's the short answer. I opened my spam folder this morning and I saw it's all these like, I'll help you show up first on Google emails. But yeah, long story short, no, you don't have to spend anything. And I actually advise people to start having a play around with this themselves first. I would say that's a good move with anything in your business, simply because if you later decide that you want to outsource your SEO, then at least you have a basic understanding of what the person doing it should be doing, because there's so many people out there who, like you just said, say that you pay me X amount of money and I'll get you this, that, and the other results. But if you don't know anything about SEO, then you have no way of understanding, like, are they telling the truth? What's going wrong? So I would suggest starting with it yourself. You'll see how easy it actually is. And then it's up to you. If you don't have time, if you don't really enjoy doing it, then you could consider outsourcing, but you definitely don't have to.
That's good to know. That, like, start educating yourself first, and then you can make informed decisions and shop around if you are in a position to outsource. Folk, before we wrap up today, please let us know if you have any other questions. This is a key point before we start to close. We'd love to answer any questions you have about SEO and podcasting, or any other content that you may create to help you be discovered and grow your audience faster. You did mention a few resources earlier, Lauren, so I think this would be a good point for us just to mention those resources. We can bring those obviously up on screen. There we are. So folk can take a screenshot. There's a few on here that you recommend. Could you walk through what these are?
Yes, absolutely. So Wordstream is a keyword research tool. It's just got like a search bar, and then you can type in words that you want to look at the search volumes for, and it will pull up some data. I think it's got the how competitive it is, how many people are searching for it every month on average, and maybe a couple of other bits of data. That's completely free. Then you've got Google Ads keyword search, which is quite similar but a bit more in depth. That you don't need to pay for either, but in order to set up a Google Ads account, you have to put in your credit card details now, which is quite annoying. But you could also use Google Trends, which I didn't write on here, but that's another good one just to check. And then finally, Ubersuggest is pretty similar to the others. I would have a look at all three and see which one you prefer.
Fantastic. And what about your own services? If folk want to work with you, how can they get in touch?
So I am Laura Martin on LinkedIn, or copy that -copywriting. And yeah, I offer a range of different services. Done for you services include SEO optimized website copy, monthly content packages, which would include blogs, emails, or podcasts. They're kind of separate things. I could help you with your podcast SEO, although I stand by what I said. I think you should start by trying it yourself first. And then launch packages. So that includes sales pages and email sequences. I also offer review and feedback services. So Power Hour, which is basically 1 hour call together where I'll give feedback on a specific piece of content or help you with, say, for example, SEO. It's kind of like a training. And then I don't really advertise this, but since Laura and I worked in this format together, I thought I would mention it. Do like a 5-week training program where we have weekly calls and then access like conversation on Slack where we can work through kind of anything really. That's a bit more flexible.
And that program was amazing that you put together for me, Lauren. I'm so glad that you're offering that to the folk, because like you mentioned, for folk to understand like a bit about this and to gain a foundational understanding and to start building from there. That's exactly what that training program did for me. And now I know if, you know, I'm going to come back to you, of course, and be like, can I take you up on the offer of reworking some of my show notes and working through the archives? But I now kind of know how to speak the language a bit more, and I know what I want and what I want to focus on. And that's really empowering. So I can be a lot more strategic about how I spend investments, how I invest in my business, and what sort of realistic results I can expect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's amazing everything you've done with what we went through last summer. So I would take Laura as inspiration that you can do this too.
There was a point, wasn't there, where we were like, this is like, I remember you saying, I'm going to say expectations. This is a lot. Like, I'm packing like 5 years of, you know, like 5 years, like that takes people ages to learn within this week's. Like, are you sure you want to go every week? And I was like, yes, let's do it. Let's do a training session every week. And then like by the third session, I was like, oh, she was right. This is a lot. But got results though, but I learned so much, so I'm so appreciative. We do have a few more questions that I'd love to answer before we log off today. I've got one here from a fellow podcaster, Holly Cope. We actually did a live a few weeks back, actually, Holly and I, talking about ways to monetize your podcast. So you can obviously go to my website to find the replay of that. That was a fantastic conversation. Holly asks, how do you make your transcript on your website readable and coherent? Because transcripts can look a bit of a mess and sentences jumbled up. I think this also relates kind of to the formatting and also the SEO keywords aspect. Do you have any tips, Lauren?
Yeah, absolutely. So formatting is something I forgot to mention, actually. It's a big part of making your content engaging and readable for people. So that should help keep them on the page longer. So it's definitely a good idea to tidy it up. I would suggest taking out any ums and ahs and things like that, and then trying to look for natural breaks in the transcript where you can move it to a new line. I don't know how you tend to do it, but if you have the person's name and like a colon and then you have what they said, then I would make sure that those are all on separate lines just to break that up slightly.
Taking note of that. That's good. So spacing and breaking, and that spacing, is that also because folk are kind of looking on their phones as well? It kind of gives those breaks, like thinking about that mobile first as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're editing, we're often editing on computers. So sometimes it looks okay, maybe even a big screen. So I would have a look at what it looks like on your phone as well and just think, would I read something like this? Am I just looking at it because it's my content? And then go through and break it up. There's kind of general rule, no more than 6 lines per paragraph, because that can then start to look a bit much for the reader.
You know, when I'm editing the video podcast episodes I do, like we kind of follow the rule, well, Haven and I would follow the rule of having just 2 lines of subtitles. You can do that by doing certain cuts in the subtitles to break it into different lines. So you're not having a stack of lines that kind of, you know, conceal the person's face as they're talking. You have to have a lot within that breath. So it's kind of the same concept that's applied from editing the content to the transcript itself. Just looking for those moments to put a break in, add a space in the transcript text itself on the website. It's the same principle that people are probably already applying if they're editing video podcasts, just to make that connection.
Yeah, absolutely.
Super. Thank you, everybody, for joining us and for asking those questions. If you do have any other questions that we've not had time to answer, and I can see people joining us from LA as well. So thank you so much for spending an early morning with us. I really appreciate that. And Shane's in Shanghai, so it's late his time. So I really appreciate you spending time with us. If you do have any other questions, then you can drop them in the chat and we will get back to you later. And of course, you can reach out to us on LinkedIn with further questions. Lauren, it's been an absolute delight talking to you today about this topic. Thank you so much for being so generous with your expertise and sharing and applying it to the world of podcasting. It's been really inspiring talking to you, and really it's practical, it's empowering, and I feel like all those gurus that now contact me, which, you know, saying all these neggy things, I'm just going to be like,
Yeah, I know.
Lauren Martin told me this.
Yeah, don't play that one with me.
Yeah, exactly. So thanks, everybody. Thank you, Lauren. Have a wonderful day and speak to you soon.
Thank you
Bye.
so much. Bye.